Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
So today on the podcast, we're joined by Nick Palumbo. Nick's a seasoned expert with over 2 decades dedicated to clinical research operations. He's deeply passionate about clinical research and has extensive experience in business and project management, strategic feasibility, and site and patient recruitment. In today's session, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of feasibility.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Ted.
So, Nick, so great to have you here today. Thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really
so just to fill people in on how we met, because it's quite an interesting story. You had done a presentation with Clinical Leader on the feasibility process, and I had sent Dan Schell a note, the editor and the host of the meeting, and I had just kind of commented, well, how come there was no Site Voices in this in this presentation that was done, the webcast that was done, and so he said, hey, well, why don't we do a LinkedIn Live event? And so I said, sure, no problem, and he set that up, and it just so happened that you were the person that he invited to be part of the sponsor perspective, and so it was a great opportunity to talk to you about feasibility then. Really looking forward to our conversation now. But what I thought we'd kick things off with was, during that LinkedIn Live event, I made the comment of how I felt feasibility was broken. And then after that, we met again at a conference, and you actually presented the topic, is feasibility broken? And so I'd love to dive into that with you and just explore that further.
Yeah, I didn't realize at the time that the comment had come from you, but when I saw it, it really resonated with me, and it struck me as like broken. I mean, come on, it's definitely an imperfect process for sure, but broken. I didn't understand where that perspective was coming from, and then it really hit me as like, okay, well, that is a site perspective, right? And maybe from my side, I'm not seeing it the same way. And from a feasibility standpoint, right, we have to be open to all perspectives and everyone's perceptions, right? We have to be unbiased, judicious in our approach to the work that we do so that we can have a more well-rounded strategy, projections of how we do things. So I just kind of, one of the things I try to do, not only in my work, but in my life, is just kind of allow myself to open my mind and just say, okay, maybe I'm wrong in certain things. So what does that mean? Like, how can I explore this to prove either that I'm right or wrong in my assumptions? And so I started diving into it and doing a little bit, some research on things, and saw a few of your posts and others that post a lot from a site perspective, and realized, yeah, they've got a point, at least from their perspective on things. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that all came about. Was it kind of opened the eyes, and it was, I think, important for me working on the sponsor side, or even if you're on the CRO side, to understand the impact of the requests that we put out to sites and what kind of demand we're putting on them to quickly turn around a feasibility questionnaire or get that CDA signed or whatever it might be. And we just have to understand too, hey, you guys are busy as well, right? You have a job of taking care of patients. And so even though this is an important part of your overall business, there's still important work to be done outside of just completing a questionnaire. So yeah, so I thought that was really enlightening for me. It helped me understand by just kind of researching it myself what you as a site might be going through and how we as a sponsor CRO could be impacting that.
No, that's great. And by the way, if anyone has never had the opportunity to hear Nick present, if he's on the agenda for a conference, you got to go see him present. He is excellent presenter for sure. So yeah, thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really interested, Nick, in terms of like what were the main sort of differences in the perspectives that you were able to glean from sponsor and site perspective?
So the main differences and then key things that I found from the site is the lack of transparency that they're getting from the sponsor side, lack of communication. So between those two right there, right, lack of transparency is that lots of times when we send out a request to complete a feasibility questionnaire, maybe we're just sending out a synopsis, a concept. Maybe it could be even just a few blurbs about the protocol itself, but rarely do we send a full protocol at that point, right? So automatically the site is blinded to some portions of the study, and we're asking them to fill out this long list of questions based off of a few points of information that we've provided them, right? So if we're not providing a full picture, how can we expect an accurate picture back, especially in regards to projections? Communication. And Ted, one of the examples that I shared was one of your posts about the feasibility questionnaire going into a black hole. And that struck me as well because, yeah, it's true that lots of times there's this dead space between when the feasibility questionnaire is returned and the site actually hears an answer as to whether or not, yeah, we want to move forward, thanks, but no thanks, whatever that decision is. And even still, even after selection, there could be dead gap between the selection letter and getting a reg pack. And so we have to do better in regards to keeping communication open and building that relationship. If the relationship's not already built with the site and the investigators, like take that time to just build on the relationship so that when things are ready to move, you have the contacts that you need to work with. You know what pieces of information you need to send to the site. All of those things. So really, those were really the two main aspects of it. Also, too, there's also a lot of increased tension around and burden that we've put on over the years with site feasibility. So I think that piece as well, whether it's just increasing the size of the feasibility questionnaire and the number of questions that are asked. I honestly, I feel it's a bit ridiculous that we try to ask so many questions. And I think it's just a result of the internal study teams within either the CRO or the sponsor just allowing people to ask questions and submit questions into the questionnaire. When really the purpose of the questionnaire is to determine whether or not the site can be selected for the study, right? And so ask only the critical questions that are needed and keep the other things for the PSV, the pre-study visit, or other forms of communication with the site that you can do outside of the questionnaire.
Well, that's just it. It's like determining what information do we absolutely need to know in order to decide whether we're going to have a pre-study qualification visit with the site, and what are the big issues versus all the ancillary questions that get asked that really are not big issues. So it might be, do you have this piece of equipment? It's needed for the study, but if the site has the population, we'll figure out how to get that piece of equipment. Like that's a minor issue, and that maybe doesn't need to be added into the questionnaire.
Exactly.
So Nick, in terms of like, what are some of the factors that have the biggest impact on a group's ability to accurately forecast for studies?
Yeah, so there's a number of factors that we look at over time, and in the best case scenario, we're able to work from protocol concepts in through the start of the study and enrollment, right? And over that course of period of time, because feasibility is an iterative process, we're continually collecting new data and looking at different things, right? But we start off with benchmark data or historic studies that have previously closed or completed enrollment, trying to match up in the criteria for that study compared to our study, and see how how much confidence we have in using that past enrollment rate or groups of enrollment rates to apply to our study. From there, we'll continue to look at maybe publications to help us refine things. For example, let's say, for example, we're working in oncology for an indication that requires a specific biomarker. Maybe there's very few studies, if any, that have targeted that biomarker in the past, right? So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, how close can we get with those benchmark studies? And then look at publications to say, okay, well, what percentage of this pancreatic cancer group has this biomarker, right? And then make that deduction to say, okay, well, based off of that, then if the enrollment rate was 0.08 for the historic study, but now we're reducing the number of patients that we can include because of this specific biomarker, maybe we need to look at a 0.05 enrollment rate. So we'll use that information, and then that gets us to a certain point. And from there, what we'll do is we'll start looking at countries, and depending upon the scope and scale of the study, will depend on, and also to some of the logistical requirements, whether or not we go outside the U.S. or what regions we actually can involve. We'll start looking to see, okay, how can that impact? How many sites could we include in there in a given country, and then move into our site feasibility. Really, the site feasibility aspect of it, and using those site projections will help then improve upon the confidence that we have in our enrollment projections, right? And in the best case scenario, what we expect is that the enrollment rates that we're taking from our selected sites in the end should be close to what we see in our historic benchmarks, right? And if that's the case, then I think we have good level of confidence that where we're going to go in the future. Now, as always, we should always be looking to improve upon what has been done in the past, right? So from an operational aspect, we'll see, okay, are there things that we can do to improve upon this enrollment rate, right? Or what would be some of the risks that would impact our ability to match or exceed the enrollment rate? And lots of those times that it could be involved with the contracting or the regulatory submissions and approvals in given countries, or it could be clinical supply issues or other things that could play into that. So we have to weigh all of that, because in the end, you can't enroll unless you have active sites, right? So we have to take a very strong look at the time to site activation, because that plays a key role in that and our ability to meet
Does it
timelines.
happen very often where you do the initial work, the research and searching the publications and the benchmarking, and then you go out to sites and you have that recruitment rate in mind, and you get something back from the sites that just completely throws you for a loop, and it's nowhere near what you were expecting?
Yeah, sure, that happens all the time. Now, going back, we had talked earlier about the lack of transparency that sites are given. And so what we do is when we receive a projection from a site in regards to their enrollment, we always discount it, because we know that there are variables that either we or the site cannot control, and maybe are not accounted for in this, right? So we do discount those rates. And there are times too where this tends to come more from the commercial clinical research sites than anything. It's like you get that blanket, oh, we can enroll 10 patients. And it's like, did you really put any thought into that? That's when we're like, do we really, that puts a lot of questions in our head about how accurate really is this site. So we need to dive in further. And really what we should be doing is using the pre-study visit and the CRA to drill down at the site and say, hey, look, did you consider these criteria and does this still stand? Now, one of the things I'll say is, especially from an oncology perspective, and a lot of the larger institutions, most institutions now will refuse a study if they cannot have a level of confidence of enrolling at least a certain number of patients, because from a business standpoint, it's not worth it for them. So they'll take a look at that, and in some cases, we should know that at least at the minimum, they're telling their internal group that they can enroll that number.
Mm.
So we're
Right.
hoping that it's somewhat accurate, but we can't go by face value and
Yeah.
have to discount it.
So as we were talking, one of the questions that came up was, do you think there's any value in sharing some of those, benchmarking rates with the sites during feasibility? So, for certain studies, is there value in telling the sites, based on our research and historical performance of sites, we're anticipating an enrollment rate of 0.2 patients per site per month, and actually giving them some of that information to help inform their decisions? Or maybe that's not a good idea. I don't know. I was wondering.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thought, but let me tell you why I don't think it's a good idea. And it's because that overall enrollment rate is an aggregate. It's a combined rate. So we know that that's over the period of that study.
Right.
That's the average, right? That is going to happen, right? And so there are sites that are going to enroll well above, and sites that are going
Correct.
to enroll well below. We don't want to tell a high performing site, we only expect you to do this, right? So it's better off that we leave that piece out and see what the site feels that they can contribute, because ultimately what our job is in feasibility is to select the sites that have the highest potential
Correct.
for enrollment.
So, Nick, in terms of that was really great what you just articulated. It's what I really liked about it is a few things that you said. One of them is that, effectively this is a work in progress. We have to refine as we go, as new information comes along, right? And I think that's so important for organizations to realize, because I have a saying that I love. I've stole it from someone. I can't remember who now. I think it was Keynes or something. And he said it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. And I think that ability to be able to say, listen, this is what we're working with at the minute. Be mindful that this is going to change over time. And as a result, our forecasts will change over time with it. How, when, just like in feasibility and sort of general planning overall, do you have like an indication, even if it's just gut, to say like, how far are we typically off from the first projections to the actual what happened? Like, where is the sort of like, the delta, if you will? Because it's so complicated, right? It's such a complicated process.
Yeah, I don't think we do a good enough job of keeping track of that piece and seeing, how where we started and where we ended. So no, I don't think
Well,
there's.
I mean, for me, it's really interesting. I was stood and actually talking to someone a couple of days ago. I'd been to the tube station in London, and what was super interesting is that there used to be tons of anxiety from passengers on the tube station, and it's like, where's my tube? When's it coming? And they just never know. And what was interesting is that they solved that problem by actually putting times to say, your next tube is going to be arriving in 2 minutes, and then, actually, it's delayed for another 3 minutes. It's been stuck at a red. And although the reality didn't change, the actual, just the knowledge alone was enough,
Yeah,
to dampen down the anxiety of organizers or individuals in this instance. Do you see that
right.
same sort of like
Yeah,
human?
yeah, you're yes, in that sense, yes. So what we try to do when we're developing our projections is that we want to be to a point where we're about 80% confident in our projections, right? And part of our responsibility also is to track the enrollment over time. But so it starts with site activations, right? You set a milestone to have your first site activated by a certain date, and then from there you expect a period of time to get the remaining sites active. Because obviously, again, the more sites you can have active early, the better it bodes for your ability to enroll on time. So we take a close look at the site activations and then compare it to an enrollment. And yeah, we have very detailed projections that by month, by country, to say okay, when are we expecting patients to be enrolled in each of these studies, and track them accordingly. And if things start to deviate, well, then, being off by a patient or two in a given month is not necessarily something to worry about. But if you start seeing a trend, right, then it's like, okay, what's happening? And that's when we have to start raising some flags and saying, okay, let's take a look at what's happening in the study, whether it's engagement with the sites or other things that we need to address and see what we need to do to get things back on track.